Hello and a warm welcome to the Ros Savage Project. And I'm delighted today to welcome a real heroine of mine, Dame Stephanie Shirley, also known as Steve Shirley, which is a story that we'll unpick a bit later on. Dame Stephanie, welcome.
It's delightful to be here, and hello.
I'm really looking forward to talking to you on the subject of courage and many other things today. As someone who has lived a really exceptionally I think we've got a really interesting conversation to have around the use of the word courage, especially as it relates to women. But maybe I could start off by asking you just to give us a 2-minute introduction to your life story.
Well, it's a long life, Ros, which I think makes a difference. I've crammed quite a lot in. But because I was a child refugee back in 1939 from Nazi Europe, I was determined to fill that life, to make sure that that was a life that was worth saving. And so not only is it long, but it's also very dense. And I started off as a backroom researcher. I went to evening classes to get my degree. I then got really bumping against the glass ceiling over and over again. And I set up my own software house in the days when people laughed at me, and not only for a woman setting up a serious business, but also because software at that time was given away free with the hardware, and nobody could sell software. It was free as air. That might have been enough to fill a story, I suppose, except that our only child turned out to be autistic, profoundly autistic, and so I had to dovetail my vigorous professional career with rearing my own family, and that was very difficult. I knew that we were in serious trouble before he was a year old, and things began to be difficult when he was about 3, and he spent 11 years in hospital, and you know. But basically, that took me into the philanthropic area, because the first charity that I set up had my son Giles as the first resident in the first home of the charity that I set up to pioneer services for autism. So there I am. It's a full life, and very happy to discuss things.
Thank you. I'd like to go right back to the start, and you coming over to England on the kinder transport before the war. Something that fascinates me about that is I find it hard to imagine anything that could be more disruptive to a life than at such a tender young age to be shipped off by your parents to complete strangers in a foreign land. And you do hear these stories about people who've had a very insecure childhood, and they compensate for it by wanting to hang on to things, to want to surround themselves with an illusion of security. And yet that's been your life has been lived at so much the opposite extreme that your wonderful autobiography is in fact called Let It Go. And it does seem that ability, that courage to have things and then to let them go has been such a recurring theme throughout your life.
Yeah, well, that title refers not only to material things, but also to letting go of resentment. Shortly after the end of the war, I joined the Anglo-German Association, for example, because I realized that it was no good going on hating Germany and saying I will never set foot on German soil, which is the sort of attitude I had as a child. And I eventually realized it was up to people like me to reach forward and join that partnership with Germany at a very naive level. And that, of course, led to the European Union, which, as you realize, is just absolutely all in the air now. I'm distraught that Britain has decided to come out. Really, 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 but we mustn't go into politics. But I think the trauma of my childhood has given not a desire to surround myself with things. I mean, some people say once a refugee, always a refugee. And certainly my mother was like that. She was, although she became materially okay, She was still, saving bits of string labelled as bits of string too short to be of any use, this sort of thing. Whereas I have decided really that the only things that matter to me are ideas. And I've tried to follow that sort of intellectual life with a spiritual, not religious dimension, and make sure that what I'm doing, what I'm aiming for, it is worthwhile and is making a difference in the world.
I'd love to hear more about that spiritual dimension. Can you explain a bit more about what that means to you?
To me, spiritual means not the fairies at the bottom of the garden, but the non-material aspects of life. Music, art, friendship, very, very important. Having support from friends who really accept you as you are, not a sort of public life where we all keep up some sort of a facade. And that inner life very often goes together with faith, which it doesn't for me. I mean, I started off part Jewish. Hitler called me a crossbreed or subhuman, depending on the mood he was in, I suppose.
Charming man.
I was brought over to England by the Quaker Society of Friends. I was sent to a Roman Catholic convent. I went to classes thinking to become a Christian, and eventually realized sort of in my late teens that none of them really meant very much for me. So I went on looking for a faith, some sort of God that I might believe in and love and feel protected by. And it was like that for decades. I really went out of my way to find out about other religions. And then eventually, round about my retirement, so it might be something to do with release from stress, I suddenly realized I'm not searching anymore. I'm quite happy that I don't know. I'm quite happy to not have any faith. And so it's changed over my lifetime, but I certainly am more interested in spirituality than faith.
It does seem that
you have a faith.
Do I?
Yeah.
My parents were both Methodist preachers, so I was
a
very conventional religious background. I'm not religious personally, but I do.
Are they disappointed that you haven't?
No, not at all. My father passed away 11 years ago, and my mother actually has the courage to ask herself challenging questions about what religion, what faith, what purpose does this serve, and who does it serve, and why should it serve Christians more than people of any other denomination? It's a fascinating subject. I could talk about that for a long time, but we're here to talk about you. And it's interesting that in connection with courage, it does seem that one of the themes that's emerging through my research is that a lot of people who are deemed to have acted courageously do seem to gain strength from connection to some higher purpose, be that spiritual or whatever. And I don't know if I'm projecting onto your story when I was reading your book, but it did seem that you had some very powerful themes running through your life, like a continuous thread that have informed and inspired your choices as you've been through these many different phases as a career woman, as a mother, as a philanthropist.
I think I've always been lucky, really, Ros, because I knew where I was wanting to go to. And I was going to be the world's first mathematician to solve a particular problem. And I wanted to do that. That was what was driving me for years. And then I realized that I just didn't intellectually have it in me to do that sort of research work. But luckily the computer industry came along, and then I was going to do this wonderful organisation of software for women. And it was this crusade, and that kept me going for 40 years or something. So I always knew where it was I was going to go. And people have to have a mission, they have to have a vision, and that's what we would hope from politicians. And at the moment in Britain, we haven't got it.
Hear to that. I love that word crusade, because there is that really strong sense of mission. So this idea of empowering women to have their own income was a real driving force for you. But did it ever make you scared or nervous that you were going into uncharted waters and doing things a completely different way than they'd ever been done before?
Well, I like to do new things, Raz. I like to make new things happen. And I'm easily bored, and that's part of, I think, the rationale for that. Go on to your next question.
Okay. Well, actually, going back to politicians, I'd like to bring Hillary Clinton into our conversation for a moment, because there was something that you wrote in your book about what shocked me now, you wrote, was the discovery that the more I became recognised as a serious young woman who was aiming high, whose long-term aspirations went beyond a mere subservient role, the more violently I was resented and the more implacably I was kept in my place. I was reading a really interesting commentary about Hillary Clinton the other day, noting that any time that she's run for any kind of office, her popularity has plummeted. And it's when she's being quiet and like the well-behaved little Stepford wife that she becomes more popular. And it sounds like you maybe ran into some similar challenges. And I'd like to hear a bit about how you dealt with those challenges. Or maybe some advice to Hillary on how she can deal with it.
Oh, I mean, I don't understand American politics at all. I couldn't dream of politics. But it's interesting that, we have got Hillary now standing, I think, for the second time, isn't it? Sort of, she's come up. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's significant that I didn't have a good education. So lots of people were telling me what I was supposed to do. Lots of people were telling me you can't do that as a woman. And certainly in my generation, there were things that legally you could not do. You could not serve on the stock exchange, you couldn't drive a bus, fly an aeroplane. I couldn't even open my company's business account, bank account, without getting my husband's permission. So there were lots of legal barriers then. And the more somebody tells me I can't do something, the more I want to do it. And that's a sort of, I think most people who are courageous, if they are, don't think of themselves as courageous. I think of myself as stubborn. I think of myself as a survivor. My refugee childhood meant that the most awful things happened to me at that time. New family, new country, new food, new everything. What can life throw at me? I've lost my son. What else can life throw at me? And that gives me a lot of confidence.
Yeah, it sounds like resilience is also a big component of your style of courage.
Yes.
That ability to come back.
Yeah.
Because in the business context, there were quite a few times in those early years, weren't there, when you were right on the brink of going under and had to just dig in and do whatever it took.
I can remember us sort of sitting at home and literally rocking with a sort of fear, sort of visceral fear. What am I going to do? What can I do? Because I was so emotionally committed to this crusade for women that I was very, very anxious not to be classed as what's called a fair weather company, a company that survived when the market was good and things were relatively easy, but could not work through a recession. And that stubbornness held me in good stead, I think.
Did it also stand you in good stead with the enormous challenges that you faced with Giles?
I'm not sure that was stubbornness. I think that is the all-pervasive parental love. I had no idea that parental love was so strong, far stronger than sexual love, far stronger than the sort of religious love that I've observed in other people. So that to me it was quite, it went without question that I would die for my child. I nearly did once because, quite instinctively I dashed out in the road after him. But living for him was the thing that really took courage. And I think I define courage as going on in the light of pain or grief or both. And I can understand that people view me as courageous for having dealt with not one but two such concurrent problems in my life, but not sure where this sentence is going.
Well, just to talking about having to be courageous in not just one aspect of your life, but on with Giles and also with your career at the same time, and you pushed yourself so hard to cope with needing to bring so much strength and fortitude to every single day that you did actually break down at one point, didn't you? It was just too much for even...
That word fortitude, the ancient Greeks always talked about fortitude. They didn't talk about courage. And I wonder if you distinguish between the two characteristics of fortitude and courage, because they thought it was one of the four main virtues that led to a peaceful soul. Right, but your real question was, remind me.
You described, I was going to coming back to work after you'd had this collapse in your health. You described it as one of the hardest things that you'd ever had to do. And I think
I did talk about it very deliberately, because I'd like to talk about moral courage later on, because it seems to me that mental health, poor mental health affects about 1 in 4 people. So it's not, but it was very, very quiet. It was considered quite shameful to have mental health problems. And I was prepared to say, I have been severely ill. I have been hospitalized from my depression. I've been on tablets for years, but now I'm really a happy person. I haven't been on medication for depression for years and years. So you can recover. But it was pretty grim, and it was very long, and I wouldn't want to go there again. And I think that's the sort of courage of what I call that the courage of 3 o'clock in the morning. You're really sort of struggling with that black dog, as Churchill called depression. There is a very little you can do except fight. And let me talk for a minute about the difference between moral courage, which I think we've been talking about, and physical courage, and I think they're different. Moral courage, the more you use it on small issues, the easier it becomes to use it on the big things. So the more you do, the easier it becomes. Whereas physical courage is more like a bank account. It becomes overdrawn. The more you fight, the more stressed you become, and the less you're able to cope. And that applies to managers who are looking after staff, who have to make sure that their staff are not overstressed. But also, we have to do that to ourselves, make sure that we have to have a sort of healthy selfishness to make sure that we ourselves survive as an individual, not just a thing.
And what are your practices for that? How do you do that self-care that means that you're able to show up strongly in the world?
The only thing I'm conscious of, Roz, is that, and it's one that I talk about with women, about keeping yourself fit and keeping your energy levels up. And so I swim 2 or 3 times a week. It used to be half a mile, now it's down to a quarter of a mile, and very sedate swimming. So, but it does keep my energy levels up, and I make sure that I sleep properly. And those are simple things that keep me cheerful and make sure that I can do the things that I've set myself to do each day. And I do set targets. The things that I want to do today, this week, are significant, they are difficult. There's no point in doing a job that I find easy. I want to do, my sense of worth comes from achieving in a task that is with difficulty within my grasp.
And that brings me back round to a lovely phrase that you used earlier about having lived a dense life. And certainly looking at your CV, you have packed an enormous amount into one lifetime. And as you say, it has been a long lifetime, but even so, you've achieved much more than many people would achieve in several lifetimes. So I'm curious about those choices that you make, about how you plan your life. And I think you might have mentioned just now how you set yourself difficult things to do and you have targets for each day and each week. Do you have a kind of deliberate process for that? Or is this more of a sort of instinctive inclination towards the challenging?
I believe most of those things rather sort of instinctive. The one that I've considered a great deal is, where does my innovation come from? And I really observe when I have come up with new things, where's that come from? And sometimes you wake up with it in the morning, so obviously your subconscious is working on it in your as you sleep. Sometimes it is a sort of analysis that points out that this is the route to go. It's very seldom like that for me. It is instinctive. It suddenly occurs to me, this is what I need to do. And that makes it very easy for me.
Yes. I've heard it described as the heart should be the master and then the head is very good at executing things, but really the instinct is a much better guide to which direction we should be going in, and then the head's good at deciding how we get there.
That's good. Yes, I agree with that. Yes.
Coming back to the different, it sounds like we're arriving at a definition of courage where courage isn't so much a thing in itself as an agglomeration.
An approach, a sense of being.
Yes. And do you, in your experience, having worked with many thousands of people, largely women over the years, do you think that women are as courageous as men, more courageous maybe?
I wouldn't like to comment on that, but it does seem to me that the chances are that the courage is of a different sort, like the courage of working 35 years with a learning disabled child, the courage of actually starting a crusade for charity or whatever it is, the courage of keep going during the menopause, the courage of going through childbirth. We always joke that if men had children, there would be no families more greater than one, because that would be it. I screamed so much in childbirth that the nursing staff came and asked me to be quiet because I was frightening the other patients.
Especially the ones who are about to give birth, I should imagine.
So I think it's slightly different. Would I have the courage to fight in the war? I think I'm a pacifist. At the time of Suez, my husband and I seriously talked about that England might be going to war again. And, well, I sort of said, I know about computers, I'd be doing a backroom job, I wouldn't actually be fighting. But I mean, I think probably I would have been a conscientious objector.
I'm curious to know, because you've experienced and played a part in the women's equality movement. We're still not there 50 years after this conversation started in earnest.
I find that terribly depressing. It is 50 years since I started some of these things, and there were women before me and women after working hard to actually move our gender forward. And at the same time, today's young women are talking about hitting barriers. Now, they're not legal barriers that my generation had, but they are still perceived barriers, and they are, in a sense, more difficult to break down. So we have to what we're talking about in business, at least, is unconscious bias, that even teachers have a bias towards their boy pupils. And that's amazing. And if you ask any of them, they would be horrified to be told that. But if you actually film them, you realize that teachers spend more time with their boys, that they respond to their raised hands, that they ask them, they pause longer for them to get their question together, they use them as assistants in teaching. And the only way to really get over those sorts of unconscious bias, because I'm sure it's not intentional, is to deliberately have a technique like I'm going to ask boy, girl, alternatively. And there are all sorts of things like that where, you know, in your writing, for example, I'm sure you're conscious of gender bias. Do we write he, she, or it? Do we write he all the time and put a little? I mean, my company, when it did a prospectus, it was all in terms of, I mean, professionals write it, all in terms of he. And I sort of said, but this is a largely female company. Oh, well, there's a convention. There's a little sort of subscript somewhere that says wherever he is used, the feminine gender is included. And I said, oh, okay, well, you know, if it's just a convention, we'll have our prospectus with she throughout and have a little note at the bottom that where she is used, it can embrace the males as well.
I love it.
You can't fight the logic of that. So it's fighting every little bit of racism, every little bit of gender discrimination. This is what I call the small moral battles to speak up when you do know what the right thing is and you're scared.
So in connection with that, in the professional context, I would suspect that a lot of women have been in that situation where they do find the courage to speak up in a meeting, only to be more or less disregarded, then have a male colleague say virtually the same thing 2 minutes later and get credit for it. So when we run into that unconscious bias in the workplace, what would your advice be as to how we can say, excuse me, and point it out without, by the same token, being labelled as being an aggressive woman?
Well, I think one has to distinguish between aggressive and assertive. I'm quite happy to be recognised as assertive, or I like now to be called disruptive, because I have disrupted several things in my life. But basically, I think women have to learn to ignore that, continue, perhaps repeat themselves. I got in a habit at board meetings when something like that happened, which didn't much, because once you've got a bit of status, it doesn't happen. I would just clear my throat, and everyone would realise, we haven't responded to her. I didn't say anything, and it soon got the message across, because the models of leadership for men and women are very different. And I don't want to lead in a masculine way. I just want equal but different. And I certainly want to be listened to and evaluated for my contribution to the real world.
I love that. So you train them to recognise that the danger sign was the little cough.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point that you raised there about masculine leadership and feminine leadership. How would you describe feminine leadership?
It may be more idealistic. It's more idiosyncratic, because there aren't many women leaders. It's diverted from some of the things that matter by trivial things such as dress, which the men in general do not have. a female leader whom I really respect is Angela Merkel, because she is now enormously powerful. She seems to use her power in a responsible way. She always looks much the same. Nobody comments on what she wears. She always looks decently dressed, professionally dressed, full stop. You're not sort of saying, oh, she's got interesting shoes, you know. I mean, come on, life is more important than that.
It is an interesting thing, isn't it, that in our culture, women are judged so much on their appearance. And so I think a lot of us spend a lot of time feeling quite insecure about that. And while we're feeling self-conscious about our appearance, we're not really giving our full attention to
the words that we're saying. I'm doing this, I've got that, you know, yeah. I think we have to give attention to the world outside, not be introspective. Is this your action now?
Yeah. You know, sometimes you just really want to see into someone's mind and just, you know, what does it feel like to be you? Because it does seem like you are indomitable. All of these situations that you've had to help in. There seems to be this immense strength, like this real...
Well, it is this business about when you've coped with major things, nothing much scares me anymore. I'm still nervous in front of large audiences, but not as much as I used to be, because I get used to it, as I'm sure you have. I still get... what are the things that I fear now? I fear losing my intellect. It happens to so many elderly people, and I would really hate that to happen to me. And there's a good chance that it may. I don't fear physical pain. I don't particularly like it, but I don't fear it. Life gets easier in a sense as you know that you are maturing, and you can look back with equanimity as to where you've come from and where you are.
It's picking up on something that you said earlier. It sounds like courage is a muscle, that the more you step outside of your comfort zone and do things that are uncomfortable for you, paradoxically, the more comfortable you become with that discomfort.
Yes. And then you set yourself another challenge. Yeah.
Yes, so that you carry on growing that comfort zone larger and larger. Yeah, it's one of my sort of pet theories that comfort zones shrink if we don't keep pushing on them and making them larger, that the default is that they're trying to shrink in around us. Yeah. Also, something that I've noticed is that as people do get older, some people, their comfort zones do shrink. They start to kind of venture far outside.
Your vision shrinks if you're not careful. I've recently started saying I'm not going to do intercontinental flights anymore. I might do one, but I used to be able to fly to the States without thinking about it. And so your own world does shrink. And so your comfort zone shrinks within it. And I think it's simply that.
So you do need to keep being expansive.
Keep going, keep moving.
Yes, that's definitely been your motto. There was something, again, picking up on a quote from the book that I was quite fascinated about surrender. You wrote, "The art of surrender is, I'm convinced, a key to many kinds of success and fulfillment, and many lives are limited by a failure to master it." So I'd just like to ask you a bit more about that surrender, how it feels, what you're surrendering to, and how that draws you forwards.
I think I surrendered power in my company when I deliberately set out to pass control to the workforce. And I say workforce because many of them were consultants, so they were not just always employees. That was over a long period. So again, it was a vision of something that I wanted to do. When it actually happened and I lost that power, my goodness me, I missed it. And that really was quite uncomfortable until I got used to remaking my life with a different sort of power base. giving away large sums of money, which is what I'm doing now, has felt uncomfortable at times. I do not want our husband and I to finish up in penury. So we've been very businesslike, and we've ring-fenced enough funding to make sure that we can have a hot dinner every day for the rest of our lives. But most people do hang on to things, and it's part of the sort of Buddhist principle of hanging on. And I've learned the more I show my weaknesses, the more I give away, the more I lose, the richer my life seems to become.
Like this kind of constant flow between you and the world around you.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's really beautiful. It seems like you have a great ability to accurately draw that line between the things that you can and want to control and the things that are outside of that circle. And you do see an awful lot of people in the world expending a lot of energy trying to control the uncontrollable. Yeah. And you also see people not taking control of things that they could control if they're willing to take more ownership of their lives. Does that sort of resonate with you, that you're quite good at knowing exactly where that boundary lies and acting accordingly?
I don't want to be like an amoeba sort of floating in the sea, sort of the service of other people's whim. But I'm not sure that I'm terribly interested in control at all. It's just not important for me.
Actually, it's interesting. There's an American called Michael Singer. I don't know if you've come across his books at all, but he wrote a book called The Surrender Experiment. And strangely, he also founded a massively successful tech company. And it really grew out of him becoming very interested in Zen meditation and making this conscious decision that he was just going to surrender to what he intuitively sensed to be the will of the universe. And it brought him great wealth and financial success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, never have heard of it, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I think you might enjoy his writings. It does seem that there is something there about finding real richness of life in not being grasping, that sort of Buddhist non-attachment.
When people come to you for help, what is it that they're looking for?
I think the underlying themes are, I know certainly driving forces for me have been the quest for happiness and fulfillment. Mm-hmm. For me, my happiness comes from being fulfilled, to feel like I'm doing something useful in the world and creating some kind of a legacy.
You look comfortable in your own skin.
I've worked hard to get here. Yeah. Hasn't always been so. It's wonderful to just tap into your wisdom. I'm feeling so inspired and actually empowered by your strength.
That's lovely. Been a great pleasure.
Thank you for being such a wonderful role model. Just as a final little question, what would you say to any young women who would love to be entrepreneurs, but they're being held back by their own fears? What would you say that might literally encourage them to take that step?
It has to be to internalize those fears, find something that you like, get trained in it, and then just go for it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Fantastic. Thank you for being such an inspirational guest. It's been a real privilege to talk with you today. Thank you, Dame Stephanie.
Thank you, Roz.